slightly amusing to me. Lori had picked me up at the train station, and we pulled up to the house, and there was Joe underneath his pickup truck, obviously working on it. So when we came up the driveway, he came out and introduced himself, and we exchanged pleasantries, and I said, just out of being nice, like, "Oh, so how's the truck?" And he said, "Oh, well, God asked me to fix it, so I'm trying to fix it." Okay, that's an interesting response. Never heard that one before, but I didn't know him and didn't want to say anything, ask him about it. Then later that evening, we came back. Lori and I had gone off to do some things and came back, and he was in the house, and as we came in, Lori called out, "So honey, how's the truck?" And he said, "Well, God told me to take me to a mechanic." And again, I didn't really know it well enough to go, really, did she change her mind, or something? Was there an update, version 2.0 or something? I was a little amused by this, I must admit, sort of like, how do you know that that's God talking to you? And it's not just our ego or fears or whatever it is, right? But we do that sometimes, all of us. Is it because it's the decision is the easiest route for us to take? I think that there's a lot of that in some of the New Age thinking. I love my older sister, but she tends to think, well, if it's easy, then it was meant to be, right? And I remember her one time, she had an opportunity. A friend was going away, invited her to go away for the weekend in some wonderful spa, but she was really busy, and she said, "Well, if it's meant to be, I'll go, but I don't know if I'll be able to get my work done." And I was thinking, sounds to me like you could make it meant to be, but that's up to you. But that's the way we sometimes think. We always look for those signs to somehow make it easier. And I do that all the time, right? Trying to make a decision, looking for a sign that'll tell me this is the one, right? And really, I'm just trying to get affirmation on what I really want to do, right? But is it really all the things that makes it easy, right? I mean, I think about all the things that I worked hard on in my life. I had to work hard for those things that I love the most. Things aren't always easy. Now, I do believe in sort of serendipity, and that sometimes things go smoothly for things that we want. Yet, I think as humanity, we give up our agency, right? Because we don't want to accept our responsibility. I mean, I wanted to ask Joe, why didn't she just say, "I tried to fix it, but it didn't happen, so I'm going to now take it to a mechanic"? Why give up all that agency to God? And the funny thing is that I am a theist, right? So a theist is someone who believes that there is an inbreaking presence in the world that calls to us. And deist is someone who believed that at one point there was a God who came and created everything, and then they left. They're no longer involved. And an atheist, right, is someone who does not believe in any type of inbreaking presence. Now, I personally am a theist. But whether or not you want to call that an inbreaking presence, or your conscience, or your best self, the divine within, you can call it your oversoul, as Ralph Waldo Emerson called it, or as Elijah experienced it, as that still small voice. You can call it whatever you would like. But to me, it's not about giving up that agency. That inbreaking presence is not about giving up responsibility. I don't believe in a puppet master God who makes me do anything. It's an invitation to listen. I remember when I first heard my call to ministry and felt this thing that I was going to be a minister, I was like, "You've got to be kidding me. I don't do organized religion." And I still don't really. I mean, we're not that organized. But I remember you can argue with this voice. The problem with this voice is that it's often really right, which is kind of a bummer at times, but in the end, it's always a good thing. But it's hard to hear sometimes, and I think that that's what all the spiritual masters in the world, that they agree on, right? Whether it's the author of Kings or Ralph Waldo Emerson or whoever it is, these masters in India, that this little voice, however we experience that, it's really hard to hear. Because it has to get past all those layers of the shoulds, right? From our culture, our parents, our peers. It has to fight past our sort of subconscious or unconscious fears, anxieties, our angers, those memories. And all of those are wind and earthquake and fire. I think that trying to hear this voice is really at the root of all spiritual practices since the dawn of time is trying to hear that voice. In fact, you could say that all religions, to a certain extent, are built upon trying to help us find and listen to that voice within ourselves, that part of ourselves that will tell us the truth, even if maybe we don't even want to hear it. And that's what transcendentalism is. That's what Ralph Waldo Emerson was. He was a transcendentalist. And if you look on the back of our announcements, you'll see our principles and 6 sources, and you see the very first source that we have is a transcendentalist statement. It says that direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an open to the forces which create and uphold life. That's a really fancy way of saying we listen to that voice. And that's part of our authority. That's where we often come from. But how rarely do we listen? Because our mind is this incredible, powerful force within us. And don't get me wrong, I love the mind. I love my mind. It's really great. But it likes to be kept busy all the time. It likes to think. It doesn't necessarily always want to go to that intuitive place, that place beyond our thinking. And it's really difficult because it really doesn't want to shut up. Our minds can be like a cranky 5-year-old, right, that's hopped up on sugar. I want to think. And our thoughts race all the time. It doesn't want to quiet down. But what happens when we do listen? Whether it's we go to, say, a special place in nature and we just feel that peace that comes to us. Maybe it's in prayer or in meditation or journaling, talking to a spiritual director. When we get beyond our fears, our anxieties to that voice, how do you know it's that voice? How do you know it's not the wind or the earthquake or the fire? I personally have 2 ways that I know. One, it usually shocks the heck out of me in some shape or form. But usually it's also when I find something there so beautiful that it's overwhelming. Because there's often that invitation that's waiting for us. It's a gift that says, this is who you truly are. Something that calls us to be bigger than our anxieties and our fears, to be more compassionate, to listen, to be present. It calls us to our best selves, and that can be terrifying. Trying to live up to that place of beauty and courage and hope that is inside all of us. I want to tell you a tale written by Ursula K. Le Guin, who's a wonderful author. If you don't know her, she's absolutely fabulous, an amazing writer. She wrote a short story. It's called The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas. Who here has read that story? There's a few people here who have read that story. It's kind of a classic. I invite you to do it. You can find it online. It's only like 3 or 4 pages long. She tells the story of kind of a utopian society. It's absolutely beautiful, and she describes the day, and it's festival day. And the people are laughing, and the sky is just beautiful, and everyone is healthy. There are no kings whatsoever. There's no wars, there's no soldiers. She says there is religion, but no priests, which kind of had me like, okay, fine. She does concede that there is beer. She's kind of funny in her writing. And she describes these people, and she said these people are not simpletons. They're not thoughtless, but they're very complex. There's artists and scientists. There's wise men and women and fathers and mothers. She advises, can you imagine such a place, such a beautiful place? She says, now imagine this, that there's a room in this town, maybe it's in a cellar of some house, small room with no windows. There's only a little bit of light filtering through the doorway. And in this room is a child who lives in some of the most brutal and horrific conditions you can ever imagine. This child has lost its mind. It's more animal than human. It's starving a wretched soul. This is the reason for the utopia. That there is a pact in this town for this wonderful world to exist. One child, only one child, must live in absolutely horrific conditions. It can hear no kind word, it eats only scraps, and once taken from its parents, the child will never know love again. And every everyone in Omelas knows of this child. When they come of age, they're brought into the room and they're told the truth of their utopian society. Le Guin writes this, said, often the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and face this terrible paradox. They may brood over it for weeks or years, but as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It's too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It's been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet as their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and the acceptance of their helplessness, which is perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, and the profundity of their science. So imagine living in this world. Could you do it?
No.
But you know, Le Guin, she doesn't end there in the story. She writes that as incredible as this story is, there's something even more incredible. She writes, at times, one of these adolescent girls or boys who goes to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow-lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into darkness and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. The story was written originally in 1973. As I said, it's become a classic. I think that stories become classics because they teach us something. They help us see something in ourselves, sometimes not something we're always all that proud of. There's something that we see in ourselves. We want to like Omelas. I mean, the way she describes it is this beautiful society, people healthy and happy. And we dream about that place. We want it for ourselves, we want it to our families, for our communities. But we also hear in the story what we know in our hearts, that even if we have all of those things, there are those out there who do not have those things. Those who suffer. Children, every single one of them, no matter how old they are. And I don't like hearing that. I like everything in my life to be good, everyone to be healthy and happy and whole. I don't want to hear about that bad stuff. I just like to live in Omelas. No one wants to be that child, but someone always is. And it's important to know that Le Guin is really at pains to point out that these are good, compassionate people in Omelas. They're not bad people. And if you live there with your children, with your family, could you subject them to wars, to tyrannies, to racisms, all the hard realities of the life that we deal with if you didn't have to? And she's at pains to point out that the people in this, at least at this time, they didn't start it, but they do allow it to continue. There exists in our society children throughout history that have been named as these kind of scapegoats, right? A scapegoat is something that holds the sin, the darkness of the society. Here in our Western society, first it was the Africans sold into slavery, and those African Americans that suffer today. The Jews that were decimated by the Holocaust, women forced to give up their rights over their bodies, the GLBT community ostracized and killed, immigrants jailed and torn from families, Muslims condemned for wearing hijabs or being from Syria. Like the child in our story, we, that is many in our society, we want them to carry our darkness so that we can live in the light. And many of us in our culture, we ignore that pain because we don't want to have to think about it. We don't want to have to think about those hard things. We justify to ourselves that it's not us who are doing it. So we go back to our nice lives and our own complex problems and joys. But as I said, this is about scapegoating. It's about taking a child and making that child pay for all the darkness that is within us. It's about giving up that responsibility. The idea of the scapegoat, if you are aware, comes from Leviticus, and it was an early form, basically, of trying to get rid of sin. So you had a goat, and you put all the darkness and sin of the community on it, and you sacrificed that goat. And this has happened in societies throughout history. In ancient Greece, following a natural disaster, thought, oh no, the gods are against us. So someone was chosen, and they were beaten, and sometimes maybe even killed and ostracized out of town. Often this was someone who was different. Maybe they were differently abled than us. We listen to the rumblings of the earthquake is the problem. We listen to all our fears and anxieties about job security, and so then we blame those horrible immigrants who are out to steal our jobs. Or we listen to the fires or the wind that tells us to be afraid of someone who is different. But these are not truths. They're wind, they're earthquake, they're fire. They're not that still small voice. To walk away from Omelas means that we listen to that voice, the one that says, this isn't right. I can no longer be a part of this. It means recognizing, as we Unitarian Universalists do, we try to, at any rate, the interdependent web, right, that says that when one of us suffers, we all suffer. It means working toward or walking towards something we don't even know if it exists, a world where all people are honored for their dignity and worth, not used as scapegoats for our own darkness. But how many of us can walk away from Omelas? I mean, it's a pretty powerful place to want to stay. And imagine for a moment that you had to give up everything you know. Imagine you don't even know where you're going or what that new place might look like, only that you need to find it. And I'd like to think I'd walk away if I knew a child like that I couldn't live with it. But to a certain extent, we do that all every day. There are children who are homeless and suffering right here in Orange County. And it's tough. How do we live with that? So we try to walk away. We try to make it better. So imagine the courage that it takes, that it does take to face all that pain and then do something about it. And that courage, it's deep within us. That's the cool thing, is that when you get to that still small voice within, that's part of the invitation, that's part of the beauty, and it grows inside of you. And to me, this is the role of what church should be. It isn't to cater to our fears, and it isn't to tell us to listen to the wind or the earthquake or the fire. It's to help us to walk away from Omelas. It's to help us envision something different, to help us decide not to accept the status quo, but to open our eyes, to help us listen to those voices within us that call us to our better selves. You know, Le Guin, she deliberately leaves the ending very vague. That's it, they just walk off to the mountains. We get to kind of fill in the blanks. We don't know what happens to those who walk away, who walk over the mountains. In Le Guin's Omelas, the ones who walk away, they do so alone. But I like to think that each of those people, each of them learn to listen to that still small voice, that voice that's calling out to them. Can you hear my cries? Can you see my eyes? I am calling out to you. And on the other side of that mountain, I like to think that you might meet people like this there. I like to think that over those mountains there are others that are gathered there, waiting for you to come over the horizon, waiting for all of us, a group of people, not just individuals, but dreamers and builders of a new way in the world, and each of them learning to listen to that divine part of themselves. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.